When I make these videos, I usually like to come up with some sort of stereotype at the front that we can all mock. But all I can come up with for young adult fantasy is that our protagonist usually loses her virginity to somebody dead or an animal. Hi, I'm Scott. Welcome back to Gunpowder Fiction and Plot. And this is another one in my Challenging My Assumptions About Genre Fiction series. And today we're reading young adult fantasy. Now, I've already done one on fantasy, so really this is one about young adult. And let's face it, there does seem to be a disproportionately large number of young adult books that are fantasy. I have a little help in this because I can't just pick at random. I need somebody that is going to recommend me good books. Unfortunately, one of my booktube besties is Amy.
Hi, I am Amy from Booktube with Amy, and Scott has asked me to help him further challenge some of his reading assumptions. So he's asked me to recommend him 3 books that I think that he's going to enjoy. So I'll just tell you briefly why I think that he will enjoy them. So my first recommendation for Scott is In the Ravenous Dark by A.M. Strickland. I think that Scott will enjoy this for a couple of different reasons. I think that there's a really awesome magic system in this book. I think that he'll geek out a wee bit about it, quite like I did. I reckon he'll really enjoy that. There's like a found family element to In the Ravenous Dark, which is something that I just thoroughly enjoy. We deal with the topic of sexual assault in this book, which I think he will also enjoy. Not that he enjoys sexual assault, it's not the connotation that we're trying to start here, but I think he'll like the commentary round about that. There's also just amazing LGBTQ plus rep in this book. It's absolutely fantastic. Our main character is pansexual, which is great to see. We're absolutely 100% here for it, and I think that Scott will just really enjoy the LGBTQ plus friendly environment that A.M. Strickland has written. I think that that is something that is missing definitely from classic fantasy, is that rep, and it is all in here. It is phenomenal. A.M. Strickland just has a way of writing where it doesn't even feel like sexuality or gender identity is even an issue. Everybody is just free to be whoever they are and love whoever they love, and there's no like big I'm coming out as this scene's in this. Everybody is just equally loved and equally accepted. I think that Scott will really enjoy this.
I can confirm what Amy said. I'm not a fan of sexual assault. No, but I really do like reading about sexual assault. I also loved the gender representation in this book. Not just the pansexual representation, but the gender representation. One of the characters in this book was non-binary. I didn't realise that they were non-binary until the author was referring to 2 characters at once and then said they and he. Books with a romantic theme are more interesting with some pansexual characters. Make it a little bit gay, not completely gay, make it a little bit gay, and you've got so many options. And that is, like, as a plot device, really good. What was lacking on those fronts, though, was that wasn't what this book was about. There wasn't a lot of conversation about that, which is fine, but that's not a reason to like a book. That's yay, this book has representation in it. Representation is great, but it doesn't make for a good book on its own. You need to have a good book. So was this a good book? Let's go through the things that I like to look at in a book. So let's start with our characters. Our protagonist is a girl called Rovan. Her father is killed in front of her in the opening scenes. He is a blood mage, and she is a blood mage, and blood mages are hunted. Now, as a character, Rovan is really strong. I enjoyed her as a character. She was very well written, but she was the only character that was well written. There was a real focus on Rovan and her journey. The story is really about her, and the other characters didn't come to life. They don't need to all come to life, by the way. That doesn't necessarily exclude it from being a good book. The plot was fine, but the plot was very fast-paced. Generally, though, that was fine and enjoyable. The themes, we have this representation of different genders and different sexualities, which is great. We have what seems like quite a common trope of like persecution towards magical people in a fantasy thing. That's cool. But that's not what this book is about. This book is just really intended to be a bit of a cool ride. That's fortunate because while those themes are all in there, they're not explored a lot. They're plot devices. Overall, I'm going to give this book 3 stars. Ultimately, this could be just about me as a reader, But I would have cut out a chunk of the plot and put in just a little bit more world building and a little bit more exploration of what is going on. It's a little bit too fast paced for me. But this was an enjoyable book. This was not a waste of time. I did like this, so I will give this one a thumbs up. Let's see what Amy recommends next.
Next up is Vespertine by Margaret Rogerson. I read an arc of this last year and I thoroughly enjoyed it. I thought it was brilliant. And I thought this book was so brilliantly written. It deals a lot with mental health, and I think that is something that Scott will enjoy about it. Our main character definitely suffers with anxiety, and that is dealt with throughout the book. We deal a little bit about self-harm throughout the book as well, which I think is just such a prevalent topic when we have so many people who are still heavily depressed and not getting the help that they need. I think that to have a main character in a book who deals with their mental health and struggles with their mental health is absolutely fantastic, and I've never really seen that done in another fantasy the same way that Margaret Rogerson has read it in here. And you know, Margaret Rogerson was really open with the ARC readers at the time when this book was released, saying, you know, it's been quite inspired by my own mental health. She wrote it during the pandemic, which was a time where I think everybody was struggling with their mental health, and I think that comes across really well in the book, and it makes it seem really honest, and you know, the mental health rape isn't in there to harbour a point. It is just honest and authentic, and it really resonated with me as somebody who does really struggle with their mental health and does really struggle with anxiety. To have a main character also have similar struggles, it was something that was really powerful for me, and I thoroughly enjoyed the book. On top of that, like, we know I love a ghost book, so anything that's a wee bit dark and spooky was just fantastic for me, so I'm hoping Scott loves that.
One thing Amy didn't mention about this book is it's really actually very funny. Artemisia is training to be a Grey Sister. This is a world where there's like spirits walking around, and she ends up being possessed by this spirit which she has conversations with. These spirits are essentially the bad guys, while Artemisia is essentially the good guy. The whole time you get to hear the voice of this spirit in her head, and she gets into these terrible situations that are, sometimes they're embarrassing, sometimes she's going to die, and sometimes they're whatever. But the spirit's solution to this is often, we'll just kill them all. That was hilarious the whole time. This is a Wendy's. That really tickled my fancy. Amy said this in her video, the mental health representation is in there as just representation. And this, for me, doesn't actually point out a criticism of young adult fantasy or young adult in general. I think that this is a criticism of literary fiction, of general fiction, is that why does something need to have a purpose? If you were to make your protagonist randomly a man or a woman, that really shouldn't change your book unless your book is solely about being a man or a woman. But it's pretty much all right to randomly select man or woman for a lot of books. And there are a lot of these diverse things that are not discussed in these books that maybe really could be. If there is nobody with mental health issues in novels that are not dealing with mental health issues, then unless you want to read about that stuff, and that's, if you're struggling with your mental health, you may not want to read about those things. I think it's very important in the media that people see themselves. That level of self-affirmment in the media we consume is really important for people, especially for minorities that maybe don't see themselves very often. And it doesn't have to have a purpose. And I think that literary fiction sort of forces it to have a purpose. Is that a good thing or not? And I'm not actually sure that it is a good thing. I think we definitely need books in the literary fiction that discuss mental health. We definitely need them that discuss racism and gender and cis versus trans and all of these issues where minorities are treated differently. Do we need to have a black trans man who is mentally ill and cuts themselves in a book about the monotony of work or something? And why can't we? But this is getting off topic. For Vespertine, I think the characters in Vespertine were fairly well created. I think that there were 3 or 4 characters who were pretty well solid. I didn't really get an idea of most of the side characters, but there's only so many words that you have, and you've got to move the plot along, and I think that is just an artistic choice, and I actually think I really agree with that choice. Again, I want to say that, and this is a theme with all three novels, I found the pacing a bit too quick for me, and that just might just be my preference. I think when I'm reading literary fiction, I want a faster paced book, and when I'm reading genre fiction, I want a slower paced book. The storyline was quite engaging, but there was no big punch in anything that happened. This was just fun. And again, I'm going to give it 3 stars and a thumbs up. Let's see what our third book is.
Another book that I have gotten Scott to read is Library of the Unwritten by A.J. Hackwith. I read this last year and again thoroughly enjoyed it. Just so much great LGBTQ plus rep in this as well. Again, our main character Claire is pansexual. In my review of this, I say she was basically a pansexual Mary Poppins, and I still maintain that. She is amazing, she's so badass, and I think that this will directly challenge one of Scott's assumptions about it being just good versus evil. I think that this book really deals with the fact that your opinion can change once you get to know some. There's some characters in this that are a bit morally grey, which just further enforces it's not quite good or evil, and I really enjoy that because I think that it makes the characters a wee bit more relatable, a wee bit more believable, and for me a hell of a lot easier to connect with.
I feel like out of all 3 books, this is the book that was most intended to be a fun read. I think that is the intent of all 3 books, but I think that this one was mostly about being fun. I think that anything said in a library is sort of like preaching to your audience. I actually think that this had the least grey characters, which is weird because this is in hell. This book is based in hell and you're not really sure who the good or the bad guys are. I think it still had this sort of overwhelming battle feel to it. Hell must always fight heaven. There were some actual real legitimate book references in this, and those book references were not YA, they were classics. And there were some big mythology references in this. I do actually kind of wonder if you're going to reference Anna Karenina in a YA fantasy book. I actually imagine that there's quite a few readers out there that still read young adult fantasy and Tolstoy at the same time. I do, however, think that there would be quite a few readers in this that wouldn't have picked up a lot of those references because that's not in their wheelhouse yet. I think I found the motives of the characters in here the most one-dimensional of all the books. While there was complexity in the sides and who were on each side, I didn't find I completely related to the characters in this book, so I think that the characters are the weakest in this. The plot, like I've said before, was a little bit too fast-paced for me. There was a little bit too much going on, but I think that this probably won on plot out of all 3 of the books. Overall, this was a fun read. This was fun, and I was invested in what was going on. I'm going to say that this was the weakest of the 3, but I'm still going to give it a 3 stars thumbs up. It was fun, which is the same thing I've said about the last 3 books. There's a real consistency here. This for me points out that maybe there is a place for young adult in my reading. I've said that each one of these books are fun. None of them were particularly life-changing, amazing books. I'm not sure if I want every book that I pick up to potentially be a life-changing book. Sometimes I do want to pick up a book for fun. I'm not always in the same mood when I pick up a book. Sometimes I really want a real deep, big, chunky book to really analyse and get my teeth into it. Other times, I need a book that's more of a brain massage and an escape from the world. I think that judging these books on the same set of criteria that I judge the other books I read on is wrong. I do feel like that this genre, specifically this genre, gets a little bit picked on by people in general. I mean, this is the genre of Twilight. I think that what I am doing by rating all these books 3 stars is exactly what people do when they pick on Twilight. You could probably tell without reading Twilight if it's a book you're going to enjoy or not. And I feel like we need to judge books on their intent as much as your experience. If you don't enjoy the intent of the book, that doesn't make the book a bad book. That makes you and the book a bad match. And I do think that that is often an issue that we have when we discuss young adult books. I certainly think that this calling, and I am guilty of this myself, calling a book young adult as an insult for the book, that's probably not a good thing to do. I definitely feel by reading these books, I have learned something about myself as a reader. I have learned where I can enjoy these books. That said, I don't think that this genre is going to be something that I read a lot of. I found all three of these books just lacking in a bit of complexity that I enjoyed. Obviously, all three of these books, the writing was relatively simple. You kind of expect that from a YA. I think that that's actually awesome from a YA because sometimes you don't know how simple or complex the language is when you pick up a non-YA, and sometimes you want simple. And sometimes you want nice purple writing. I think all of these books fit into the above average category, but none of them blew my mind. I'm going to say that every YA fantasy book that I have read has been better than average. Maybe this is a safe genre. Maybe this is the genre that I'm always going to enjoy, even if it's not going to be my favourite book. I'd like to thank Amy for helping with this challenge. It was really appreciated. And I'd like to just give all of you out there a kick up the bum. If you're not subscribed to Amy, just go and click on her channel, check her out. She's actually one of the best booktubers on booktube, bar none. She does read a lot of YA fantasy. But if you've watched this video to the end, I just talked about YA fantasy too. And she also reads Scottish literature and all sorts. I love it when Amy has an opinion on a book, either good or bad. She doesn't hold back, and she's just got the best reactions ever. That's what I want from a booktuber, and Amy delivers 100%. So please, if you're not already subscribed here, or if you have never watched a video from Booktube with Amy, go on, click on her channel. Links in the show notes. If you enjoyed this video and you want to see more videos about me challenging my assumption on different genre fiction, on the end screen, I'm going to put in a link to my video about challenging my assumption about fantasy and challenging my assumptions about thrillers.